guys, welcome to Costa Rica Real Estate and Investing with me, your host, Richard Beckson. Today, we're going to be talking with Alberto Solano of S3 Engineers here in Costa Rica. This is the first time we've had an engineer on the actual podcast. We've had architects, we've had builders, but never an engineer. So we're going to be discussing things to consider when building a house here, the permitting process, and also how S3 engineers can help. I know that there's quite a few of you out there that potentially might be looking to buy land and also build here in Costa Rica. So I thought this would be a great podcast to cover that. Remember, if you've got any questions for Alberto or any future guests, or you'd like to see other podcasts in the future, let me know. I'm more than happy to ask them or get future guests on the show. So let's get straight into it. Alberto, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Very good. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thanks for taking the time.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
No worries. Well, maybe you could just start off by, a lot of people here are always looking to build here in Costa Rica. But what role does the engineer play in this? Because typically, I suppose when you build a house, I've never built a house outside of Costa Rica before, but do you use an engineer?
Well, you should, definitely. And legally, you're required to, because in the end, and this is a really good question, an architect is the person who's going to take what you want and make it work, like define the spaces, make it look pretty, but then you need it for the lighting to work or to the electrical, and then you need the structure to be enough. So yeah, you need it, and it's really important. So okay. That's the first role. We have a lot of roles, and probably we're going to talk about it in the rest of the conversation. But that's our first role.
Awesome. Well, there you heard it, guys. You need an engineer. So this is going to be an interesting conversation that we have here with Alberto. Alberto, you've been here in Costa Rica your whole life, and I'm sure you've been on a lot of building of beautiful projects down here in Costa Rica. But in general, what has surprised you recently?
Well, that's a really good question, because the truth is, my answer would be like, I've been recently surprised by the same things that I get surprised before. And the main thing is how lucky we are here in Costa Rica with our situation, like how we're located, our political environment and everything. And even in times of crisis like we're going through right now, we always seem to bounce back from hard situations. And I'm not saying that with everything that has happened with COVID, we are in a great shape. There's a lot of people without work and a lot of difficult stuff. But on the other hand, a lot of opportunities have arisen. Real estate market is bouncing back, construction is bouncing back. So I think it always surprises me how not only Costa Ricans, but the people that come here, even foreigners, tend to struggle and go through those situations and always bounce back to a better place.
Yeah, I think that's Costa Rica is a very resilient country, but it's also, I always like to refer to Costa Rica as the Garden of Eden, because nothing really ever happens here and it's all beautiful and everything's great. Even during COVID, when my fellow British people were all in lockdown, we were all still running around here, the sun's shining, drinking beers and stuff. But let's talk about building in Costa Rica, because I think that's really what, people are going to be very interested in hearing about. When people come here and they're like, I'm going to build my house here in Costa Rica, what are things that they should consider? What are the main parties involved in the project? You mentioned that the architect, the engineer, the contractor. What do you think people should consider when building here in Costa Rica?
Well, I think you've partially answered that, because I think that the first thing you need to consider, and this is not only for Costa Rica, like everywhere, you need to get good advisors, people who have been in the market, who know the market, people you trust, mainly, because there's a lot of good professionals, but you need to trust them. And this is a really, really important. Ask a lot of questions. The process of designing and getting permits or even building, it's something that we do every day. So a lot of professionals just tend to think that they can explain it to you in a 4-minute call and then you're gonna understand it. But the reality is that it took us some time to get a hold of it ourselves. So ask those questions and ask them tons and tons of time until you're really sure that you understand. And if at some point you have like doubts, go back and ask again and listen to what your advisors are saying, because I think a lot of people come here with the idea that this is my budget and I want to do this, and sometimes it's not realistic. So it's better to adjust to a reality than to think that you're going to be the exception and be able to build with more with less. So,
I'm gonna ask you a question here. I mean, again, the parties involved, is it the architect, the engineer, and then the contractor? Are they the three people, or there are other people involved?
Those are like the main people, but you have, well, for the first party involved is the client. Then you have a lawyer if you're buying land, and you don't need a lawyer to build, but if you're buying land, you need it. And if you're building in a property that has some constraints that we do have a lot here, and this is actually good. We protect our resources, our natural resources. So we do have a lot of forest covered areas. We do have a lot of wells and protected areas. So if you're in a situation like that, it doesn't mean it's bad. You just need to be sure. Then you need an architect, you need an engineering team. You don't need just an engineer, because there's lots for let's say for a small or medium-sized home, you need an engineer to do structures. You need an engineer to do electrical work, and you need an engineer to do mechanical work. Those are the three main. Then you need technical studies. Usually you're not going to be in contact with them, and the architect or the engineering team are going to handle it for you. But this means getting surveys, topography, soil study, environmental studies. You do not need those, and a lot of people try to skip it. The reality is that soil study it doesn't come at a high price, and it can save you a lot of money and a lot of troubles. Then when you get to the construction phase, you need a contractor. This contractor can be the same as the design team, or it can be a separate one. And you can have a project manager. Not all people do it, and for homes it's not that typical, but you can have it. It can also be part of the initial team. It can be a separate person, and then you can have lots of other related professionals like interior designer, landscape designer, lighting designer, and well, this.
Wow.
And
that's a lot of designers and a lot of engineers by the sounds of it. So
mainly if we bring it down to a medium size, I don't know, 350 square meters, which is around 3,700 square foot, I would say you can do with the engineering team, the architect, the technical studies, and the contractor.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, again, so we talked about finding a good engineer, a good architect. I mean, you said ask a bunch of questions, but I mean, if I'm sure that they're going to be buying a piece of land, a realtor is going to be involved. That realtor is going to suggest an engineer. I mean, what questions are the most vital questions to ask an engineer if you're going to contract them?
Well, that's a hard question, but it's a good one.
Would you want to see the stuff that they've done before?
You want to see that, and that's a good reference point. But the thing is that luckily we have a really good education system in Costa Rica, and engineers here are pretty high quality. Most of them, I mean, there are exceptions like everywhere. So from a technical point of view, if you see some work and if you get recommendations, that you can trust that technically he can handle it. But there's another way to look at it. Engineers, we tend to be pretty technical, pretty cold, pretty like math driven and results and stuff. But when you're building a home, there's a lot of feelings involved. There's a lot of like understanding your client. So I would actually ask questions more in the line to see if this person really understands what I want and what I need, and if he's really listening, because again, and we engineers a lot of times tend to think that we know all the solutions and we know how to do it. But the reality is, even if we know how to do it, we need to really understand what you want to do. So that's one of the questions. And the other questions I would ask is, what is the process going to look like? Like, if I'm going to start designing, what's the process going to look like? And if he says that you just need to get a catastro and plans and get permits and that's it, then that may be a red flag. You need to understand that if he just, or if this person just wants to deliver plans, get a permit and get out of that job, he probably just wants to do his portion and he's not looking at the big picture. And there's a lot of contingencies that can happen if you don't actually do your research before even start the design.
Okay, so I mean, it sounds like the design part is very, very important, and I take it that design part is with an architect, and that architect then is also going to bring an engineer in. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and who manages the project from start to finish? The overall concept, is that the architect, is the engineer, is it two together? Would you suggest finding a company that has both?
It can be either one of those. Usually the person who manages the process is what I would call the person who owns the client. If you contact an architect, he's probably going to contact me or some other engineering team, get him on the team, but you're going to be talking to him, he's going to be talking to us and to every other person involved. But if you talk to an engineer, he's going to probably bring a couple of architects to see what you like and manage it. So yes, basically it can be both. I mean, any of those two, or it can be a third party. For homes, it's not that common to bring a third party because it becomes another expense, and it's not really necessary because homes are not that complicated.
Yeah. I think that's great. That's great advice. I mean, I remember talking to Richard Hammond, the architect beforehand, and he said, look, your architect and your engineer are going to be vital. They're the two real vital pieces. But let's talk permitting a little bit, and I know this is going to be a bit, because there's a whole, rabbit hole of permitting here, depending on that. But let's just talk a normal, I've bought a piece of land somewhere. It's not that big, it's got residential use. I can kind of build on it. And I go ahead and I get how long does the permitting process take to build like a 300 square meter or 3,200 square feet house? I mean, how long roughly is it going to take to get all the permitting? Okay,
if you're talking from the beginning, like you just bought the land, before even going to permitting, you want to do, and this is for me is my main recommendation, is what the Board of Engineers calls preliminary studies. I know you said you already have that, but what the residential use you have and everything. But preliminary studies means you need to understand what you're able to do in your property. What's the permitted use, what's the major coverage, all that. And I always say, if you're in a hurry, try to go slow. So try to really understand what your possibilities are and your limitations. Because if you go ahead and start a design without that, then you're going to be changing your design. And it's easier to change your opinion before. Then you start the design process, which is separated in two phases, like a master planning or schematic design, which is work you do with an architect, where you decide how many rooms you want, how big you want the rooms, where you want the kitchen, like a general layout.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily, and a lot of people try to get construction documents at this phase, but if you start doing engineering plans at this point, you're going to be changing a lot and you're involving a lot of people in those changes, which are not needed. So once you have your house or your project laid out and you're happy with it, that one should take around a month. A month, two, and this is the biggest question mark. It can be a month, it can be 5 months, it can be whatever you want it to be, because you need to have chemistry and you need to be sure that of what you want. I mean, if you're changing and changing and changing, that process can go longer. Once you have the general layout designed, you go to construction documents. That process can take around 1 to 2 months, depending again on how many changes you try to make. I've seen design processes go over a year. Wow. Because you now want the kitchen bigger, so if you're really like sure of what you want, it can be around 1 to 2 months. And then you start the permitting process. Basically, permitting process for homes has a 2 to 3 stages. And this is something that changed recently. Before, if you were building a home, you just went to the Board of Engineers first, and then to get a municipal permit. Now, there's an if. If you have a pool in your house, you need to go to the health department. So let's say you have a pool, because for coastal properties, usually you want a pool.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have a 350 square meter home, then you go to the Board of Engineers. They're pretty quick. So I would say 2 weeks. The truth is they usually respond even earlier, but let's say 2 weeks to be safe with that. Then you go to health department, which takes about a month, and they do take that month. And once you're approved by that, they respond on the last possible day. And once you're through with health department, you go to municipality, which should take a month if you really did your preliminary studies. Because once you get to municipality, they're gonna ask for visados and uso de suelo and a lot of documents that are pretty easy to get, but they take some time. So if you did it at the beginning, you just have them. If you get there and have them, then you can extend 2 to 3 months more.
So I mean, from start of the permitting process, when putting everything in to the end, you're probably talking 3 months, 4 months?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. And then of course it depends how long on a design phase that you take. But I mean, on average, I mean, are we talking 6 months, would you say, from start to finish?
Yes.
Okay.
Pretty good.
Great. Yeah. Now, I mean, you've been on a lot of projects before. You know, I mean, and I always like to kind of ask people this, and I suppose it's a focus on the negativity, but where do you feel that most building projects here fail when it comes to homes?
Communication.
Yep.
And honesty. I mean, if you really trust your advisors, I don't know, the architect, the lawyer, the engineer, you need to really communicate with them. You need to really make sure that you're on the same page. You need to understand what their scope is and what their scope isn't. So for instance, again, with changes, if you ask an architect to give you a set of plans, but once they're done, you go ahead and say, hey, now I want 2 more rooms, remove the pool, and I want 2 stories. Well, that's a different project, you know? Yeah. So you want to make sure that you communicate, and that can be a result of poor communication. You want him to really, really, really understand what you have at the beginning. And also you need to really trust him. So as I said before, there's a lot of limitations on depending on the project. But let's say if you have an agricultural land, you cannot build more than 300 square meters. That's what the law says. And that's not something the architect's gonna change. You can build more, but for the house can only be 300 and the rest is agricultural things. So if your professionals go and tell you you can build 300 square meters and you try to push to get more, there's ways to find loopholes and workarounds and stuff, but know that if you do, you can run into some trouble at the end. And secondly, if you tell me I have $200,000 for that home, and I told you it's gonna be 250, but you push and push, and I end up saying, okay, you can do it with 200. You're probably not gonna be able to. And once you're in the construction phase, it turns out it was gonna be more expensive. You're in budgeting problems, and so really try to get those honest answers and deal with it from the beginning. Planning phases. In the planning phase, everything's so cheap to change. I mean, if you want to move a door in the construction documents, that just takes a draft, man. If you want to move it in construction, that's
it's a little bit, it's a little bit more difficult, right? Wow. I think that's great advice. I mean, spend time in that design phase. I mean, really do and make sure it's perfect to what you want. Just because, again, I mean, if you then go to permitting and then want changes, do you have to then go back and resubmit the permits?
No.
Okay.
No, that's a great question. The law allows you to make changes during your construction phase, as long as you don't increase your area in more than 10%.
Okay.
That's one of the conditions. And the other condition is that your changes do not affect regulations. For instance, if you have that 300 limit for agriculture, don't go over it. Don't go into the setbacks. Just abide to regulation and don't go over 10%.
Okay.
You can do that.
I think that's great advice. I mean, just spend the time planning, because otherwise, plan to fail or fail to plan, as we say. So,
exactly.
Spend your time in that, because once you start laying bricks and cement, I mean, it's very difficult to make changes there. So now,
well, it's common and it's understandable. It's not bad to make changes during construction because it's easier for you to see what you're actually building. But try to minimize that. Try to.
I mean, based on that though, is there something that you always recommend your clients have in their house, that typically they don't have in North America, but down here, where that's an amenity or something structural that people just don't think about, where they're like, wow, I didn't even think about that?
Be energy efficient. Be mindful of your surroundings and try to adapt to them. And instead of adapting your environment to you, I mean, there's a lot of cheap and easy passive ways to do this. And you're not only helping the environment, but you're also helping yourself by not having future costs. Like, I don't know, try to be simple. If you try to put all the new tech in there and everything that you're not going to use or something, then those are more things you want to maintain, more costs. So be energy efficient and try to be mindful of your surroundings. You don't want to go and cut the entire mountain to put your house. We have a lot of mountains, so if you have a good architect and a good engineering team, you can just adapt to that instead of going ahead and push whatever you want to.
I think that's a great point. I mean, be mindful of your surroundings, but also if you go down and you chop trees and stuff down, I mean, you're gonna, number one, you better make sure you have the permits to do that. But secondly, you're gonna upset a lot of people. You have to understand, this is Costa Rica. People are proud of this country. It's rainforest, it's protection, and you will annoy the community and the neighbors if you do that. So just be very, mindful, I think, of that. But I mean, you mentioned some stuff there to be energy efficient. I mean, what is some of that stuff, if you don't mind me asking? Are we talking like solar heating for water, or I mean, what type of things are you thinking?
Well, first of all, passive actions like have good natural ventilation, good natural lighting, all those things are the first thing you need to do. Have energy efficient appliances, even the light bulb. Those are super cheap things that you can do and will save you a lot. And then solar panels and solar water heating. I heard this guy from Germany talking a couple of years ago about solar power in Germany. They are the largest solar power producer or were at that point in the world. And he was saying, listen, in the best place we have in Germany, like from the radiation point of view, it's worse than the worst place you have in Costa Rica. I mean, you have a lot of sun, you have a lot of energy, and actually what you spend on solar panels is probably going to be less than what you're going to save. Your investment probably will return in less than 4 years.
Yeah. Again, I think that's the thing here is, guys, we get sun nearly every day here, so yeah, so use it. Now, we talked about buying land here and building a home, but and we're going through that process, and it's probably best to get a lawyer involved. But what stuff do you think that you suggest people do when it comes to due diligence?
Okay, well, there's, again, a lot if you go into complicated properties, but if, let's say a simple, straightforward property, you want to have water, you want to make sure you have water, and you can.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because again, some people will be like, oh no, there's a well on the property. So is that water? Or no, dude, the mains water just runs right out in the front. What should they get, a water letter? Do they need to make sure that well has concession? What's some of the questions that you think are the red flags, Alberto?
Well, the best scenario would be to have water from the city. Yep. And have a water letter, which is pretty easy to get. You just go ahead and request it, and they'll respond in about 2 weeks. So yeah, water letter would be the first. If you have a well, that's interesting. First, when you have a well, you're required to have a 40-meter setback from that well. So that's land you're not able to build on unless you do some additional studies and stuff. But like roughly, you can say you have a 40-meter setback. So that's land you cannot build on. And secondly, you need to have lab analysis for the quality of the water. You need to have that. For a home, you don't necessarily need a concession, but you need to have it registered and a bunch of things, which take time. If your project's anything above a home, you do need to have a concession. And to get a concession on a well, it can take up to 2 years.
Yeah.
Because again, water is a pretty delicate subject here in Costa Rica.
I'm 100% agree with you. I suggest if you're building something, even a house, just make sure you get a water letter. Even dealing with a well, is okay, but you just have no idea sometimes. It's electricity can be bought in, but water is not so easy.
Exactly. And even I often say this to my clients: if it was my property, if I had a well on the property and also had the city water, I would close the well. Because the reality is that water is cheap here in Costa Rica.
Yeah, it is.
Having a well requires management. You have to have setbacks, you have to have pump, maintenance and stuff. So if you have water and you have a well, you might as well just close it, because unless you're using, I don't know, for irrigation or something like that, but it's not that big of an advantage to have it.
Well, my final question to you, Alberto, I'd love to ask anyone. If you inherited $500,000 tomorrow and you had to invest it into a business or real estate here in Costa Rica, what would you do with it and why?
Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit there, because I would probably invest in my business, because we believe in innovation and creativity, that those are the engines that move forward. So even if we don't inherit those 500K, we would move as a team, growing and trying to work with our clients and our colleagues. And I'm saying I'm cheating because what we do for a living is to provide a holistic consulting and engineering service. So we're not just providing design. We try to go a little bit more. We want to understand what your possibilities are in your land, what you're able to do, what's the best way to do it, how to do it responsibly, sustainably. So in the end, that's also investing in real estate. Even if we don't own the land, we're investing in having better real estate. Here, real estate in Costa Rica is a big deal. We have a lot of good real estate, and I think our main purpose is to enhance it. If I have a better project, a better planned project, my neighbor's project's gonna be better. So I would invest in both, in being better and by being better, trying to make real estate better.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask a different question then. If you had to buy a piece of property here in Costa Rica, where would you buy it? Where do you like? I mean, where would you be buying it as an investment? Let's talk about an investment. Where would you be buying?
Okay, well, that's a tough one, and probably I would go to the coast.
Yep.
The Pacific coast. I would try to see, there's a lot of land, and it would depend on my time frame. So if I want a more short-term return, I would probably go to Nosara, Santa Teresa, Flamingo, those spots that are already booming and growing.
Yep.
But if I was able to wait for a couple of years, I might find something that's probably close, but more undeveloped, so I can get good price. That does require more patience and a little bit of more risk, but it's.
Where would you be looking? Where would you be looking, Alberto?
Oh my God, Central Pacific and South Pacific. Yeah.
You mean like Uvita or Hachal or Benecal?
Yeah, those places. I mean, there's some development there, and there are already some towns and stuff, but I think it has a great potential. And the thing is that people down there, they already saw, we've made some mistakes in some towns here.
Yeah.
They already saw that. So they're really protective of how they want to develop. And we're really close to Panama, which I think it's a good thing. The downside and the reason that I think that Uvita hasn't, or that south portion hasn't boomed yet, is that it's a bit far from international airports. So you either have to drive far or get on another smaller local flight. But it's beautiful, and it's evergreen. It's always green down there.
You know what? And I'd love to get your opinion on this. Lagarto, Negra, Avellanas. What's your opinion on that area?
Okay, well, I'm a bit biased on that because my dad's a surfer since the 70s. So Playa Negra is like the first beach that we went to. There was nothing there when we started going. I think I was like 5 months old the first time I went there in 1985. So I love Playa Negra. I love Lagarto. I think it's awesome. And it's an incredible surfing destination too.
Yeah. I always, again, I love it. It feels like real Costa Rica. I think if I had 10 or 20 years to invest in land, I'd probably be looking there just because, again, it can't go, it's all going to go south. It's going to go north of Nasada and south of Tamarindo. So, but we'll see.
It's closing in from Nosara and from Tamarindo. I mean, from Nosara, it's going to go up, and from Tamarindo, it's going to go down. And it definitely is, you have Pinilla, which is close to that, and Pinilla right now is
on fire. It's doing really well. Yeah. So
I know.
Well, Alberto, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. This has been great. And I'm sure people are going to have more questions for you. So I'm just going to put your contact details in the description, and also people can comment away, and I'll basically put your name in there so that you can respond back. But Alberto, appreciate your time, and have a great weekend, buddy.
Thank you for inviting me, Richard, and this was awesome. I love talking to you.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. Thanks, Alberto.
Bye.
Bye.